Speed has always been the ultimate illusion. It looks effortless from the outside, but inside every fast machine lies a battle between physics, precision, and pure nerve. The pursuit of performance is never cheap, and it is rarely kind of comfort or convenience. It is about what happens when engineers ignore limits and aim for perfection no one really asked for, except those who live to feel it. Yet, sometimes, a company decides that the racetrack is not enough. It wants to bottle that madness for the street, to let a handful of riders touch what professionals feel at 200 miles per hour. When that happens, the result is not just another machine. It is a statement about what is possible when cost stops being part of the conversation. Stay with me as we break down one of the most extreme examples of that idea, a project that blurred the line between sport and spectacle. If you enjoy deep dives into machines that rewrite the rules, like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments which icon we should explore next. In 2015, Honda unveiled the RC213V-S, a motorcycle so ambitious that it immediately reset what people thought was possible for a street-legal machine. This was not a simple replica or a marketing stunt. It was essentially a MotoGP prototype made tame enough, barely, for public roads. The RC213V-S emerged from the same DNA as the RC213V race bike, the weapon Honda used in the top class of motorcycle racing. Every part of it, from the frame to the suspension to the way it inhaled air, had one purpose: to deliver the sensation of a Grand Prix racer without the pit crew or the sponsorship logos. At its core, the RC213V-S existed because Honda's engineers wanted to do something no one else dared to attempt: take a full competition spec machine, then work backward until it could pass emissions and safety tests. The project began as a design study in Honda's racing division, not the street bike department. That detail matters, because it explains the obsessive purity that shaped every part. The frame was an aluminum twin-spar unit that mimicked the RC213 versus geometry down to the millimeter. Even the carbon fiber fairing panels were finished by hand, using the same molds as the race bike. Building the RC213V-S was not a matter of adapting an existing street model. It was an exercise in reverse engineering the impossible. The development team stripped away electronics meant for race telemetry and added minimal concessions to legality: lights, mirrors, and a catalytic converter. Everything else remained steeped in competition logic. The pistons were forged for high RPM resilience, the gearbox featured close ratios for aggressive acceleration, and the swing arm was identical to the one used on track. Each component was built to race bike tolerances, meaning every RC213V-S demanded the kind of care and attention normally reserved for a team's championship contender. Even the way the engine was started hinted at its origins: a high-compression V4 that needed warmth before it could idle properly, a temperament closer to a stallion than a commuter bike. Honda warned owners that servicing the RC213V-S required technicians trained in race operations, because it was effectively a competition engine adapted for civility. The cost of that ambition was staggering. With a price tag around $184,000 in the United States, the RC213V-S was more expensive than many supercars. It was not built on an assembly line, but hand-finished in a dedicated facility in Kumamoto, Japan, by craftsmen who normally worked on MotoGP components. Production moved slowly. Each bike required days of fitting, measuring, and verification. Customers weren't just buying speed, they were buying the craftsmanship of Honda's elite race engineers distilled into a tangible object. But what truly made the RC213V-S extraordinary wasn't only how it was built, it was how it performed. With roughly 157 horsepower in its US configuration, it seemed modest on paper compared to cheaper leader bikes. Yet performance numbers didn't tell the whole story. The chassis balance, weight distribution, and throttle precision created a level of feedback and control few machines could match. Every movement, every lean angle, felt engineered for total clarity. Riders described the experience not as brute force, but as a kind of mechanical telepathy. The bike seemed to know what you wanted before you finished thinking it. Still, the RC213V-S came with controversy. While European models could be fitted with a sports kit that unlocked up to 215 horsepower, US regulations prevented that upgrade. American buyers were left with a detuned version, leading some critics to call it a neutered masterpiece. For them, it was an example of how regulations could strip away the very essence of what made the machine remarkable. For others, it didn't matter. The RC213V-S wasn't about raw numbers, it was about living with something that carried the soul of MotoGP in a license-plated shell. Honda defended its choices by emphasizing the purity of engineering. This was not a marketing exercise, it was a limited demonstration of what could happen when racing innovation met street legality. Every decision, from the magnesium wheels to the carbon bodywork, reflected a single question: how close can a road bike get to a MotoGP racer before it stops being legal? The answer turned out to be the RC213V-S. Riding it required a specific kind of respect. Unlike modern superbikes packed with electronic assists, the RC213V-S trusted the rider. Its traction control was basic, its throttle response direct, and its manners unforgiving to careless inputs. It demanded skill and focus, not because it was unpredictable, but because it was brutally honest about mistakes. This transparency made it intoxicating for experienced riders, the kind who understood that performance without polish could be the ultimate thrill. And then there was the exclusivity. Honda built fewer than 250 units worldwide, turning the RC213V-S into an instant collectible. Buyers included serious enthusiasts, former racers, and collectors who simply wanted a piece of history. Many of these bikes were never ridden. They became static art pieces, preserved in climate-controlled garages. Ironically, a machine designed for motion became one of the most photographed stationary motorcycles in the world. Even in that stillness, though, the RC213V-S carried immense meaning. It stood as proof that Honda could still produce something completely irrational in an age obsessed with practicality. The company took no shortcuts, made no compromises, and created a motorcycle that embodied its purest racing spirit. That decision was not about profit. With such low production, it could never have been. It was about legacy, about reaffirming Honda's identity as a builder of not just machines, but milestones. As the 2015 RC213V-S entered production, Honda quietly acknowledged that it might never do something like it again. The project was so expensive, so complex, that it bordered on unsustainable. Yet its creation sent a message to the entire industry that excellence was still worth chasing for its own sake. And that message would echo in the years to come, influencing everything from design philosophies to how brands justify their most extreme offerings. This is where the story starts to deepen, because to understand what the RC213V-S really meant, you have to see how it challenged both riders and its own creators. The next chapter reveals what happened when pure racing DNA met real-world limitations, when idealism collided with regulation, and when Honda's pursuit of perfection began to show the weight of its ambition. The 2015 Honda RC213V-S was a paradox from the moment it appeared. It was built to bring MotoGP engineering to public roads, yet the road itself became its biggest enemy. The same purity that made it breathtaking also made it impractical for ordinary use. This tension between dream and reality defined the entire life of the RC213V-S. Every element that made it extraordinary on the track also made it stubborn on the street. Honda's engineers knew this, but they pressed on anyway. The RC213V-S had to meet global regulations that were never written with race prototypes in mind. Noise limits, emission standards, and safety equipment requirements forced compromises that frustrated both the creators and their audience. In order to pass US certification, Honda had to remap the fuel system, add a restrictive exhaust, and install hardware that dulled the response of its high-strung V4. The result was a machine that felt caged in markets that demanded restraint. Owners quickly learned that the RC213V-S was happiest when ridden as it was born to be, on a closed circuit, free from speed limits and traffic lights. That reality made it a strange purchase. Few riders would ever risk damaging such a rare machine, and yet keeping it confined to a display stand seemed to betray its purpose. This contradiction became part of the RC213V-S mythology. It wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a philosophical test about what performance truly means when the world around it insists on moderation. Even with these contradictions, the RC213V-S remained mesmerizing to those who understood it. On a proper track, its balance and agility were unlike anything in the street-legal category. The bike weighed just over 350 pounds, thanks to its carbon fiber and titanium construction. Every corner felt like a controlled whisper of speed. It didn't fight the rider, it partnered with them. The steering input was instantaneous, the chassis feedback almost telepathic. Honda had succeeded in translating its racing symphony into something a skilled civilian could command. To make that possible, Honda had invested years of development in areas that would never appear on a brochure. The seamless gearbox from MotoGP couldn't be used directly, but the engineers recreated its spirit with a precision transmission that shifted like clockwork. The suspension system used Öhlins units tuned specifically to mimic the handling characteristics of the race bike. The braking system, with carbon ceramic discs swapped for steel versions, still offered near supernatural control. These small miracles of adaptation made the RC213V-S more than a token homage. It was a functional link between racing and reality. However, the economic side of this achievement exposed another layer of irony. At nearly $200,000, the RC213V-S was beyond reach for most enthusiasts. It was priced like a work of art, not a vehicle. Honda had built a showcase of its engineering power, but in doing so, it created something that could only be experienced by a tiny fraction of its audience. The RC213V-S became a symbol of exclusivity in a brand long associated with accessibility. This shift surprised even loyal Honda fans, who were used to seeing the company democratize technology rather than hide it behind a six-figure paywall. Still, that exclusivity served a purpose. The RC213V-S wasn't meant to sell in volume, it was meant to remind everyone that Honda could still out-engineer the world when it chose to. It was a flex of technical dominance, a statement of capability. The message was subtle but clear. If Honda wanted to, it could build something that matched or exceeded anything from another manufacturer. The RC213V-S wasn't about profit, it was about prestige and heritage. Inside the company, the project also became a learning platform. Engineers documented every challenge of adapting a race bike for the street, and those lessons shaped later performance models. The RC213V-S introduced new materials handling techniques, improved precision welding processes, and refined carbon fiber fabrication methods that trickled down to future designs. In that sense, even if only a few riders ever touched it, the RC213V-S influenced machines that would reach thousands. Yet the debate over its identity never faded. Was it really a street bike, or simply a MotoGP souvenir? The truth sat somewhere in between. It had mirrors and turn signals, yes, but its engine maintenance intervals were measured in hours, not months. Owners were advised to service it after every few rides. The RC213V-S refused to compromise its origins. It demanded a relationship more like a race team than a casual commute. It was an invitation to experience performance in its purest form, provided you were willing to meet it on its terms. The US market version's power limitation stirred more discussion than any other feature. Critics argued that detuning the bike betrayed its purpose. Supporters countered that even in restricted form, the RC213V-S offered an unmatched experience. The debate highlighted how perception of performance isn't always about numbers. On a winding road, The bike's razor-sharp chassis and immediate response created sensations no dyno chart could quantify. For experienced riders, it was like handling liquid precision. Every corner became an event. Collectors, meanwhile, began speculating on its long-term value. Given its rarity, handcrafted build, and direct lineage to MotoGP, the RC213V-S quickly attracted investors. Many units were purchased with the intention of never being ridden. This created a strange split in its legacy, a motorcycle designed for speed that spent most of its life stationary. Some enthusiasts called it tragic, others saw it as inevitable. In a world where rarity drives value, the RC213V-S became both a trophy and a time capsule. But even as it entered collections, it continued to shape discussions around what a street-legal racer could be. Competing manufacturers took notice, experimenting with similar projects, though none went as far as Honda did in terms of authenticity. The RC213V-S forced the industry to ask whether perfection was worth pursuing if it meant alienating the very riders it sought to inspire. It was a question without an easy answer, but it made every future superbike a little more daring. The human side of the RC213V-S story might be the most fascinating of all. For the engineers, it represented the culmination of decades spent chasing performance at the edge of physics. For riders who managed to experience it in motion, it was a revelation, the kind of mechanical intimacy that makes every twist of the throttle feel sacred. And for collectors, it was an artifact that embodied the idea that true innovation sometimes has no commercial logic. Still, the RC213V-S carried a quiet sadness. It was too rare to be common, too pure to be practical, and too expensive to be free. It existed in a fragile balance between art and engineering, admired but rarely used for its intended purpose. Yet perhaps that was the point. Some creations are not meant to fit neatly into the world, they are meant to remind us how small our usual definitions can be. As the years passed, the RC213V-S became a benchmark for engineering courage. It showed that Honda was willing to risk misunderstanding in pursuit of mechanical truth. Even today, long after production ended, riders and critics look back at it as a moment when the line between racing and reality blurred so completely that the distinction almost disappeared. When people look back at the 2015 Honda RC213V-S today, they see more than a motorcycle. They see a snapshot of an era when one company dared to put ideology ahead of practicality. The RC213V-S was not born to dominate sales charts or chase lap times on paper. It existed to prove that a street-legal machine could still carry the heart of MotoGP racing, unfiltered and unapologetic. Even now, it stands as one of the most uncompromising projects in modern motorcycling, a moment when engineering ambition outpaced market logic. Honda's decision to create the RC213V-S was rooted in pride and heritage. For decades, the company's racing program had defined its public image, shaping its reputation as a brand driven by innovation rather than luxury. But by the mid-2010s, superbikes had become highly digital, filled with electronics that manage traction, power delivery, and safety. The RC213V-S was different. It rejected comfort for connection, trading software trickery for mechanical intimacy. That philosophy made it a living statement about where true performance begins, with the rider, not the algorithm. From a technical standpoint, the RC213V-S became a bridge between two worlds. It carried MotoGP geometry, a 999 cubic centimeters V4 engine, and aerodynamics honed for competition. Yet it also carried a license plate, mirrors, and headlights. The gap between those two realities was filled with innovation. Honda's engineers developed new tolerances for machining, new composites for heat resistance, and new assembly processes for small batch precision. Many of these techniques filtered into later performance machines, though never at this level of purity. In that sense, every future sport bike from Honda carries a trace of the RC213V-S in its DNA. What the RC213V-S truly changed, however, was perception. It challenged the idea that road-going motorcycles must balance excitement with affordability. It suggested that some machines exist simply to celebrate engineering as an art form. This was a radical concept for Honda, a brand built on reliability and approachability. Yet it worked precisely because it was so out of character. The RC213V-S wasn't a product of the marketing department, it was an engineer's dream given life. That authenticity made it irresistible to enthusiasts who saw in it a rare glimpse of unfiltered corporate passion. Critics, of course, were divided. Some saw the RC213V-S as self-indulgent, an exercise in vanity disguised as innovation. Others hailed it as one of the greatest engineering achievements in modern motorcycling. Both views held true. The bike was indeed impractical, but it also represented the highest possible expression of a company's craft. For every rider who wished it had more power or fewer restrictions, there was another who admired its integrity, the fact that it existed at all, in defiance of logic and cost. Over time, its reputation only grew. As regulations tightened and emission standards increased, the RC213V-S began to look like the last of its kind. Future performance bikes would rely more heavily on electronics and hybrid systems, distancing themselves from the mechanical purity the RC213V-S embodied. In that way, it became a time capsule for an era when engineering could still express personality through precision and sound rather than code and calibration. Collectors recognized this immediately, and prices on the secondary market began to climb. The few who owned one suddenly found themselves in possession of something far more than a motorcycle. They held a piece of history. That sense of history also changed how people viewed Honda's place in the performance world. The RC213V-S reminded everyone that this was the same company that had dominated MotoGP, that had built legends like the NR750 and RC30. It reaffirmed Honda's capability to lead through innovation rather than imitation. In an industry often content to chase trends, the RC213V-S was a declaration of independence. It said that the pursuit of perfection could still come before the pursuit of profit. Even so, the RC213V-S had its limits. Its maintenance requirements made ownership demanding, and its high-strung personality demanded both skill and patience. It was a machine that rewarded discipline but punished carelessness. That made it a better teacher than a toy. Every start, every shift, every curve reinforced the lesson that power without respect is meaningless. In that way, the RC213V-S wasn't just a machine, it was a philosophy, one that valued mastery over speed and precision over showmanship. The irony of its legacy is that very few people ever experienced it in motion. Most examples remain dormant, preserved in collections. Yet even standing still, the RC213V-S continues to inspire new generations of riders and engineers. It has become a benchmark for purity, a reminder that technology should serve feeling, not replace it. That message resonates even more strongly today, in an age of increasing automation. As time distances us from its debut, the RC213V-S grows mythic. It represents the point where Honda reached the outer limit of what a road bike could be, then quietly stepped back, knowing the world might not be ready for another. No successor has been built, and perhaps none ever will. The RC213V-S remains singular, a one-time alignment of ambition, capability, and courage. It is a masterpiece defined not by how many it inspired to ride faster, but by how many it inspired to think deeper about what riding truly means. In the end, that is its lasting triumph. The RC213V-S didn't just rewrite the rules of performance, it reminded us why the rules exist in the first place. It taught that perfection has a price, and that true excellence often lives at the edge of practicality. Honda's engineers knew this when they built it, and every rider who has ever heard that engine come alive understands it instinctively. The next chapter of its story is not about production numbers or resale values. It is about influence, about how one bold experiment continues to shape the way we imagine the future of motorcycles. Because even as technology evolves, and as electrification and automation reshape the landscape, the essence of what made the RC213V-S special endures, a direct, unfiltered connection between human and machine. That ideal remains the North Star of performance design. And no matter how far the industry moves toward digital precision, the spirit of the RC213V-S reminds us that the most important circuit will always be the one between the rider's hands and the throttle. Its journey may have ended in the showroom, but its echo continues through the roar of every bike that dares to chase perfection. That is the true legacy of the Honda RC213V-S, a motorcycle that proved the extraordinary can still exist, even if only for a few. In the final part of this story, we'll close the loop and explore how its impact redefined the boundary between engineering achievement and emotional experience. The story of the 2015 Honda RC213V-S closes on a note that feels both triumphant and bittersweet. It stands as proof that human ambition can still shape machines that seem almost impossible, yet it also serves as a reminder that perfection rarely survives outside the lab or the racetrack. For Honda, the RC213V-S was more than an engineering exercise. It was a declaration of what could happen when a company ignored practicality and let its racing spirit lead. In that sense, it is less a motorcycle and more a moment in history, frozen in carbon fiber and titanium. Looking back, the RC213V-S reveals the full arc of Honda's obsession with precision. Every curve, every weld, every decision was built on decades of racing heritage. The company used the project to showcase how science and passion could coexist without compromise. That achievement may never be repeated, not because it cannot be done, but because the conditions that made it possible, budget freedom, regulatory tolerance, and cultural patience, have largely disappeared. And yet, the RC213V-S continues to influence design thinking. It pushed engineers to rethink what street legal could mean, challenged regulators to consider innovation, and inspire competitors to aim higher in their own pursuits. It showed that even in a corporate environment built on mass production, there is room for art. The bike's rarity ensured that its reputation would only grow, and today, it symbolizes the highest expression of mechanical purity a manufacturer has ever offered to the public. What makes its legacy special is that it did not just celebrate performance, it celebrated the relationship between rider and machine. The RC213V-S was demanding, but never cruel. It rewarded patience and punished carelessness. It spoke to the discipline and precision that defined professional racing, yet it allowed a glimpse of that world for those few who could handle it. That intimacy is what owners remember most. They do not talk about horsepower or top speed. They talk about how the bike made them feel, about the sense of connection that even modern technology rarely delivers. As the industry moves toward electric powertrains and autonomous systems, the RC213V-S becomes more than a collectible. It becomes a touchstone for emotion. It reminds everyone that progress does not always mean replacing the old, but preserving what made it worth improving in the first place. Honda did not just build a motorcycle, it built a bridge between generations of engineering philosophy. The RC213V-S connects analog craftsmanship to digital precision, proving that innovation and tradition can coexist in harmony. In the end, the RC213V-S is not about exclusivity or price. It is about courage, the courage to build something that doesn't make sense on a spreadsheet, but makes perfect sense to anyone who loves machines for their beauty and purpose. It is about the belief that technology should inspire wonder, not just efficiency. And it is about the rare moments when a corporation acts like an artist, creating something not because it must, but because it can. That is why the RC213V-S remains so powerful even now. It represents the idea that true greatness comes from obsession, that limits exist only to be challenged, and that sometimes, the most meaningful machines are the ones that defy logic altogether. Honda may never repeat it, but it does not have to. The RC213V-S has already done what it was meant to do: remind the world that the pursuit of perfection is still a worthy cause. If you've made it this far, thank you for taking this ride through history. Like and subscribe for more deep dives into the machines that changed how we think about performance, and tell us which legend deserves the spotlight next. Because stories like the Honda RC213V-S prove that even in an age of algorithms and data, the most powerful force in engineering is still human imagination.